Kyra's breath merged with the humid air of Viridia Prime as she perched motionless among the bioluminescent leaves of the towering sylphwood. 40 meters above the forest floor, her body was painted in patterns that mimicked the phosphorescent bark and foliage, rendering her nearly invisible in the eternal twilight of the jungle canopy. Only her eyes moved, tracking the figure that had entered the small clearing below. For 6 days, she had stalked this off-worlder. 6 days of careful observation, measuring his patterns, assessing his weaknesses. The elders of the Xylos tribe had been clear. This intruder, who called himself Jax, had violated the sacred boundaries of their territory and carried technology that threatened their way of life. Such transgressions were punishable by death, and Kyra was the tribe's most skilled executioner. The alien moved with a cautious grace that Kyra had come to recognize. He was taller than most Xylos, with skin that lacked the blue-green tint of her people. His clothing was torn and stained, but the material was unlike anything produced on Viridia Prime. A makeshift pack hung from his broad shoulders, and something that resembled a weapon was strapped to his thigh. Despite his obvious exhaustion, his movements betrayed a military precision. Kyra's hand instinctively tightened around her funbow, a weapon of ancient design enhanced with modern energy capabilities. The arrow knocked against its string contained a neurotoxin derived from the spine frogs of the eastern marshes, potent enough to paralyze a full-grown male in seconds before stopping his heart. The clearing below was not a natural formation. Kyra had spent the previous night carefully arranging fallen branches and clearing undergrowth to create an irresistible path for the off-worlder. The soft ground would slow his steps just enough. The pattern of surrounding trees would limit his escape routes. The angle of the afternoon light would momentarily blind him if he looked up. All elements had been meticulously calculated for this moment. Jax paused at the edge of the clearing, and Kyra felt a surge of tension. Had he sensed the trap? But then he continued forward, scanning the area in what seemed a routine check for danger. His eyes never lifted to the canopy where death awaited. A rookie mistake, Kyra thought. On Viridia Prime, danger came from all directions. As Jax reached the center of the clearing, he stopped again and knelt to examine something on the ground. A stream of sweat traveled down Kyra's spine, but her aim remained steady. 3 more heartbeats, and she would release. 2 more heartbeats. 1. She exhaled slowly and released the bowstring. The energy-tipped arrow cut through the humid air with a barely perceptible hum, its trajectory flawless. In that stretched moment between release and impact, Kyra already knew her hunt was successful. Until Jax moved. It was not the panic dive of prey sensing danger too late. It was calculated, efficient, as if the off-worlder had known precisely when and where the attack would come. He pivoted, one hand flashing up to deflect the arrow with some small device that emitted a brief pulse of energy. The toxin-laced projectile bounced harmlessly into the underbrush. Before Kyra could knock another arrow, Jax rolled to one side and pressed something on his wrist. The ground beneath the tree where Kyra perched suddenly erupted in a shower of dirt and vegetation. Not an explosion, something else. The massive roots of the sylphwood shuddered and began to glow with an unnatural light. The tree itself seemed to groan in protest. Kyra leapt to a neighboring branch, but too late. A net of crackling energy materialized around her, snaring her mid-jump. She tumbled through the lower branches, the energy web contracting around her body, immobilizing her limbs. Her bow slipped from her fingers as she crashed through the final layer of foliage and landed hard on the forest floor, just meters from her target. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. As she struggled to regain it, the off-worlder approached cautiously, his weapon now drawn and pointed at her. It was unlike any firearm she had seen, sleeker, with components that pulsed with a pale blue light. "I've known you were tracking me for 4 days," Jack said in accented but comprehensible Xylos. "You're good, better than the others they've sent. But I've been hunted by experts across 17 systems." Kyra bared her teeth, showing the ceremonial points that marked her as an elite hunter. "I'm not like the others," she spat. "I am Kyra of the High Branch, first blade of the Xylos. Release me and face your death with honor, off-worlder. Jax's expression showed neither fear nor triumph, only a calculating assessment. I'm not here to harm your people. I never crossed any boundary markers I could recognize. My ship crashed after being attacked in orbit. I'm just trying to reach my emergency beacon too. Signal for extraction. Lies, Kyra hissed. You bring forbidden technology to steal our world's secrets. The Council has ordered your elimination. Jax took a step closer, keeping his weapon trained on her. What Council told you that? Because someone is lying, and it isn't me. I'm a civilian xenobiologist. My research vessel was attacked by raiders using stealth tech I've never seen before. The same raiders who've been harvesting rare biological compounds from this region for months. Before Kyra could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. Not the localized disturbance from Jax's device, but a deeper, more ominous vibration that seemed to ripple through the entire clearing. The surrounding flora responded immediately, bioluminescent plants dimming their glow, while the sensitive tendrils of hanging vines retracted upward. Jax's attention shifted from Kyra to the western edge of the clearing. His body tensed. "We've got company," he said quietly, "and I don't think they're friends of either of us." The undergrowth at the perimeter began to rustle. Something was approaching, multiple somethings moving with coordinated precision. Through gaps in the vegetation, Kyra glimpsed the gleam of dark armor and masks with respirator units. Not Xylos hunters. These were something else entirely. Scavengers, Jax muttered, the word clearly carrying disdain. The ones who shot down my ship. They've been stripping planets like yours for specialized biological materials. Plants, animals, anything with unique properties they can weaponize or sell. A low, mechanical whine began to fill the air as the figures drew closer, still concealed in the thick foliage. Kyra counted at least 6 distinct sources of movement. They were being methodically surrounded. Jax made a decision. He holstered his weapon and knelt beside Kyra. "I'm going to release you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Not because I trust you, but because neither of us will survive this alone." His fingers manipulated a control on his wrist device, and the energy net around Kyra dissipated. She immediately rolled away, instinct driving her to create distance between herself and her former prey. Her hand went to the ceremonial dagger at her hip, an inferior weapon against whatever was coming, but better than nothing. Jax retrieved her fallen funbow and tossed it to her, a gesture that momentarily stunned her. "You're more dangerous with that than without it," he explained, "and we're going to need every advantage." The first of the armored figures broke through the undergrowth, humanoid in shape but encased in segmented black armor with glowing red sensor arrays where eyes should be. It carried what was unmistakably an advanced energy rifle, already leveled and charging with an ominous hum. "Run!" Jax shouted, firing his own weapon at the figure. The shot struck the armored chest, staggering the attacker, but not downing it. More figures emerged from the jungle, weapons raised. Energy blasts scorched the vegetation where Kyra had stood a moment before. She had already moved, instinct and training taking over. A Xylos hunter never stood still in battle. They became one with the environment, using it as both shield and weapon. She fired 2 arrows in rapid succession as she retreated toward the denser forest. One struck a vulnerable joint in an attacker's armor, causing the figure to stumble. The second missed as its target executed an unnaturally fast dodge. Jax was moving too, but not simply retreating. He zigzagged across the clearing, dropping small objects from his pack as he went. When the first pursuer stepped near one, it erupted in a blinding flash of light and a disorienting sonic pulse. The armored figure stumbled, sensors temporarily overwhelmed. Kyra reached the edge of the clearing and paused just long enough to ensure Jax was following. Despite everything, she found herself unwilling to abandon the off-worlder who had just armed her against a common enemy. He caught up seconds later, and together they plunged into the dense jungle. "They have thermal tracking," Jax said between labored breaths as they ran. "Standard issue for scavenger scout teams. We need to mask our heat signatures or get to water." Kyra adjusted their course without breaking stride. The mist falls are half a kilometer east. The water is laced with mineral particulates that diffuse heat readings. They moved swiftly through the jungle, Kyra leading with the instinctive knowledge of someone born to this environment. She navigated around tri-thorn patches that would have sliced through Jax's less resilient skin and warned him with silent hand gestures of the hanging vines whose sticky secretions could trap an unwary traveler. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew. The mechanical were of enhanced movement systems, the crack of energy weapons firing at shadows, the controlled chatter of tactical communications. "They're spreading out to flank us," Jax observed, his breathing more controlled now despite their pace. Kyra nodded. "There." She pointed to a massive fallen tree whose decomposing trunk had created a natural tunnel through a dense thicket. "That leads to a ravine that will take us to the falls." As they scrambled through the hollow log, the sounds of pursuit momentarily faded. The passage was tight, forcing them to crouch and crawl through sections where fungal growths had narrowed the space. The air inside was thick with spores that danced in the filtered light. "These spores," Jack said, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding the urgency of their flight. "They're bioluminescent but seem to respond to our body heat. Fascinating adaptation." "They're called whisper lights," Kyra replied, continuing forward. "They attach to predators and prey alike, making them visible to one another in the deep jungle." The balance of nature. They emerged from a log to find themselves at the edge of a steep ravine. 20 meters below, a river churned its way through a rocky channel toward what must be the Mist Falls, judging by the cloud of fine spray visible downstream. "We need to get down there," Kyra said, already scanning for a route. "The falls create a cavern system behind the water curtain. We can regroup there." An energy blast struck the tree trunk beside them, sending smoldering splinters in all directions. One of the armored pursuers had found their trail more quickly than anticipated. "No time for climbing," Jack said. He grabbed Kyra's arm and pulled her with him as he leapt from the edge of the ravine. They plummeted through the air, the rushing wind drowned out by the roar of another energy blast overhead. Then they hit the water with a jarring impact that drove the air from Kyra's lungs. The current immediately seized them, tumbling them downstream toward the falls. Kyra fought to regain control, her powerful limbs working against the pull of the water. She caught a glimpse of Jax nearby, struggling to stay afloat with his pack weighing him down. Without thinking, she grabbed his collar and pulled him toward a partially submerged boulder. They clung to it together, the current threatening to tear them away at any moment. "The falls are just ahead," she shouted over the roar of the water. "When we go over, curl into a ball and relax your body. The pool below is deep enough if you hit it right." Jax nodded, his eyes darting to the ravine edge above where more armored figures had appeared. "They're setting up static positions," he observed. "They know where we're headed." "They know one path," Kyra corrected. "Not the only path." With that cryptic statement, she released her grip on the boulder, and they were once again at the mercy of the current. It swept them rapidly toward the falls, the thundering roar growing louder with each passing second. Above, energy weapons discharged, their beams cutting harmlessly through the water around them. Then they were airborne, plunging over the edge of the falls in a disorienting tumble of spray and noise. Kyra tucked her body, as she had instructed Jax to do, and braced for impact. The cold depths swallowed her, the force of the plunge driving her deep into the plunge pool. For a moment, disorientation threatened to overcome her, but years of training took over. She oriented herself toward the diffuse light above and kicked powerfully. As her head broke the surface, she immediately searched for Jax. He emerged several meters away, gasping for air but apparently uninjured. Kyra swam to him and directed him toward the rocky shore nearest the falls. "Behind the water," she instructed. "There's a passage." Together, they fought their way through the turbulent water at the base of the falls until they reached a narrow ledge that ran behind the thundering curtain of water. The roar was deafening here, but would also mask any sounds they made from their pursuers. They followed the ledge deeper, eventually finding themselves in a spacious cavern where the noise of the falls was dampened enough to allow conversation. The interior was dimly illuminated by clusters of the same bioluminescent fungi they had encountered earlier, casting an ethereal blue glow over the wet stone. Water trickled down the walls, forming small pools on the uneven floor. Jax slumped against a wall, finally allowing his exhaustion to show. He shrugged off his waterlogged pack and began checking the contents. "Some of my equipment might still work once it dries," he said, "including a short-range scanner that could help us detect those scavengers before they find us." Kyra maintained her distance, her posture still wary despite their forced alliance. She removed her quiver and assessed her remaining arrows. Only 4 left, and the bowstring would need to dry before it would be effective again. "Those warriors in black armor," she said after a long silence. "You called them scavengers. They are not for Viridia Prime." "No," Jax confirmed. "They're mercenaries, mostly humans and other species who work for various criminal syndicates. They specialize in extracting valuable resources from protected or underdeveloped worlds. Plants, animals, minerals. Anything unique that can fetch a high price in certain markets." He paused, studying her reaction. "I'm guessing they weren't mentioned in whatever briefing sent you to kill me." Kyra's expression hardened. "The Council said an off-worlder had breached our territory carrying dangerous technology that could harm our world. That you had resisted initial contact and had to be eliminated." She hesitated. "They did not mention others." "Convenient," Jax said dryly. "Did it occur to you that perhaps I'm not the threat they described?" "You are still an intruder," Kyra countered, but there was less conviction in her voice. "And you possess technology beyond what is permitted on our world. Technology that just saved both our lives," Jax pointed out. He reached into his pack and extracted a flat device about the size of his palm. It appeared undamaged by the water. "This is what I've been trying to reach my ship with. It's a quantum entanglement communicator, basically impossible to intercept, unlike standard transmissions. But its range is limited, and I need to get to higher ground, away from the mineral interference in these valleys. The peaks to the north would provide such elevation," Kyra said automatically, then frowned at herself for assisting him. Jax nodded. "That's where I was headed when your people started hunting me. I've been shot at, chased by predators I couldn't identify, and now targeted by professional scavengers. All I want is to call for extraction and get off this planet." "If what you say is true," Kyra said carefully, "why would the Council lie about your intentions? Why send hunters after you instead of making contact?" "That," Jax said, "is the question that's been keeping me up at night. The simplest explanation is that someone on your council is working with the scavengers. They needed me eliminated because I witnessed their operation. I'm a loose end." The accusation sent a surge of anger through Kyra. "Impossible. The Council protects our people and our ways. They would never collaborate with off-worlders who despoil worlds." "Are you certain?" Jax asked quietly. "In my experience, power and corruption tend to find each other, regardless of species or culture." "Someone's lying to you?" "Kyra. And it wasn't me who set up an ambush today." Before she could respond, a faint but distinct sound reached them from deeper within the cave system. The unmistakable whir of mechanized armor. "They found another entrance," Jax whispered, already gathering his belongings. "We need to move." Kyra's mind raced. If the scavengers had accessed the cave from another point, they might not know exactly where their quarry was, only that they were somewhere in the system. "This way," she decided, indicating a narrow passage that branched off from the main cavern. "It leads upward." They moved silently through the passage, climbing steadily. The bioluminescent fungi became scarcer, plunging them into near darkness, broken only by occasional shafts of light from small fissures in the ceiling. The sound of pursuit remained distant but persistent. "How well do you know these caves?" Jax asked in a whisper as they paused at a junction of 3 separate tunnels. "I underwent my hunter's trials in this network," Kyra replied. 3 weeks alone, with only a knife and my knowledge of the land. I mapped much of it then." She pointed to the rightmost passage. "That one emerges in a box canyon thick with spine leaf bushes. Difficult terrain, but it will slow them more than us. As they continued their ascent through the twisting passages, Kyra found her certainty wavering. The stranger beside her had twice had the opportunity to kill her, once when she was ensnared in his trap, and again when she was struggling in the river. Instead, he had armed her and followed her lead. His actions did not match the profile of a dangerous intruder seeking to harm her world. The tunnel eventually narrowed to a tight squeeze that opened suddenly into a sunlit box canyon, just as Kyra had described. The late afternoon light cast long shadows from the rocky walls, and the ground was indeed covered with dense, thorny vegetation that resembled earth cacti, but with more aggressive defensive adaptations. "We can use the spine leaves for cover," Kyra said, already plotting a path through the painful obstacles. "The canyon opens to a system of ridges that lead toward the northern peaks." Jax nodded, but his attention was on his wrist device. "I'm picking up energy signatures converging on this location from multiple vectors," he said grimly. "They're coordinating a full sweep. They must really want us both dead. Or captured," Kyra corrected. "If they are resource pirates as you claim, living specimens often have more value than dead ones." "Not reassuring," Jax muttered. He studied the canyon walls. "We need higher ground and better cover. These cliffs are too exposed." Kyra pointed to the far end of the canyon where the walls were less sheer. "There's a game trail that switchbacks up that face. It's narrow, but navigable. Once at the ridge line, we enter the domain of the Mountain Xylos clans. They are less welcoming than my people, but they despise off-worlders even more. They would engage any scavengers who followed us there." Out of the frying pan, Jack sighed, but he gestured for her to lead on. They began picking their way through the spine-leaf thickets, using a combination of Kyra's knowledge and Jax's technology to find the paths of least resistance. Despite their care, both soon accumulated minor punctures and scratches from the defensive plants. For Kyra, the wounds were a familiar discomfort. For Jax, each contact left an angry red welt that suggested the plant's toxins affected his physiology more severely. "You're having a reaction to the spine leaf toxin," Kyra observed as they paused in a small clearing. "It will worsen unless treated." Jax examined his increasingly swollen forearm with clinical detachment. "Histamine response. Not unexpected with alien flora. I have anti-inflammatory compounds in my medikit, but they're back at my original camp." Kyra hesitated, then reached into a small pouch at her belt. She extracted what appeared to be a dried leaf, crushed it between her fingers, and offered the resulting powder to Jax. "Chew this and swallow the juices. It will counteract the toxin." Jax eyed the offering with understandable skepticism. "And I should trust that this isn't poison because I still need you to lead me to the true threat to my world," Kyra said simply. "And because I could have killed you many times already if that was my desire." After a moment's consideration, Jax accepted the crushed leaf and placed it in his mouth. His expression soured at the taste, but he chewed and swallowed as instructed. "Bitter," he commented, "but effective, I hope. It is called thurka. Our hunters use it to treat accidental exposure during training. The relief should begin within minutes." They continued their arduous journey through the canyon, the shadows lengthening as the day progressed toward evening. The distant sounds of pursuit ebbed and flowed, suggesting their hunters were methodically searching the area but had not yet pinpointed their location. As they neared the far end of the canyon where the game trail began its ascent, Jax suddenly raised a hand in warning. He pointed to his wrist device, then held up 5 fingers before pointing toward the trail ahead. 5 scavengers, already positioned to intercept them at the trail. Their escape route was compromised. Kyra scanned their surroundings, seeking alternatives. The canyon walls to either side were too steep to climb without equipment. Retreating would lead them back toward the other pursuing groups. They were effectively cornered. "We need a diversion," she whispered. "Something to draw them away from the trail long enough for us to slip past." Jax nodded, rifling through his pack. "I have 2 sonic disruptors left. They'll create enough noise to suggest movement, but they won't fool thermal scanners for long. The spine leaves generate heat as they process sunlight, Kyra said, an idea forming. A significant disturbed patch might mask our thermal signatures or at least create enough background heat to confuse sensors. Worth a try, Jax agreed. He extracted two small devices from his pack, each no larger than a fingertip. I'll program them for delayed activation. We'll place them at opposite ends of the canyon, then make our move during the confusion. They split up briefly, each planting one of the devices before reconvening in a dense thicket near the game trail. As they waited for the diversion to begin, crouched close together in the limited space, Kyra found herself studying the off-worlder with new intensity. His features were alien yet not unpleasant, his eyes alert and intelligent. He carried himself with the discipline of a warrior, but spoke with the insight of a scholar. Your arm, she noted. The swelling has decreased. Jax flexed his fingers experimentally. Your remedy works quickly. Thank you. Before Kyra could respond, the first sonic disruptor activated with a piercing wail that echoed throughout the canyon. Seconds later, the second joined it from the opposite direction, creating a disorienting cacophony. The effect on their pursuers was immediate. Through gaps in the thicket, they could see the armored figures at the game trail reacting to the new threat, spreading out and moving toward the sources of the noise. Now, Jax urged, stay low and move fast. They burst from cover, racing toward the now partially unguarded trail. They had covered half the distance when an energy blast struck the ground beside them, sending up a spray of superheated soil and rock fragments. One of the scavengers had remained behind, perhaps suspecting a diversion. It stood directly in their path, weapon raised for a second, more accurate shot. Without breaking stride, Kyra knocked and fired an arrow in one fluid motion. The projectile struck the figure's helmet where the respirator connected to the main unit. There was a brief hiss of escaping air. Then the scavenger staggered, clawing at its damaged breathing apparatus. Jax fired his weapon as they passed, not at the scavenger, but at the rocky ground beneath its feet. The blast destabilized the already loose soil, causing a minor landslide that carried the armored figure down the slope away from the trail. They reached the narrow path and began climbing, their progress necessarily slower on the treacherous switchbacks. Below, the remaining scavengers had realized the deception and were converging back toward the trail, their mechanical movements eerily synchronized. They're coming up behind us, Jax warned, checking his wrist device as they climbed. And there are more signatures approaching from above. They're trying to trap us between forces. Kyra calculated distances and terrain in her mind. The ridge is too far. We won't make it before they converge. She pointed to a narrow crevice in the canyon wall ahead. That fissure might provide temporary shelter. The narrow space would force them to come at us one at a time. They diverted to the crevice, squeezing into the tight space just as energy blasts began to pepper the trail where they had been moments before. The fissure extended about 5 meters into the rock face before terminating in a solid wall. It was no more than a meter wide at its entrance, narrowing further toward the back. Defensible, but it's also a trap, Jax observed grimly. Once they find us, we're cornered. Then we must ensure the price of reaching us is too high, Kyra said, readying her bow. She had 3 arrows remaining, each one now precious beyond measure. Jax checked his weapon's charge. 2, maybe 3 full power shots left. After that, it's down to minimum stun settings. They positioned themselves as advantageously as possible in the confined space. Kyra nearest the rear where her bow would have more draw room. Jax closer to the entrance where his shorter-range weapon would be most effective. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Mechanical voices communicated in a language Kyra didn't recognize, but their methodical approach was clear enough. They were being hunted like animals. If we don't survive this, Jax said quietly, I want you to know I was telling the truth. I came to study Viridia Prime's unique ecosystem, not exploit it. My research team specializes in bioadaptive technologies, finding sustainable ways to integrate biological processes into our technology instead of replacing or destroying them. Kyra searched his face for deception, but found none. If that is true, why would the Council want you dead? Why aid these scavengers? Because genuine research means documentation, witnesses, records, Jax explained. If someone on your council is collaborating with resource pirates, the last thing they want is legitimate scientific interest in the areas being exploited. We would notice the damage, report it to galactic ecological authorities. A shadow fell across the entrance to their shelter. One of the scavengers had arrived, its armored silhouette blocking most of the fading daylight. It hesitated at the narrow opening, perhaps wary of the confined space. Jax tensed, his weapon raised. Kyra drew back her bowstring, the perfect stillness of a lifetime's training steadying her aim despite their desperate situation. Then a new sound reached them, a high-pitched, warbling call that echoed through the canyon. It was answered immediately by similar calls from multiple directions. Not mechanical, not human, something native to Viridia Prime. The scavenger at the entrance turned away, its attention drawn to this new development. More calls sounded, closer now, accompanied by the distinctive rustle of swift movement through vegetation. "What is that?" Jax whispered. "Venom strikers," Kyra replied, a note of awe in her voice. "Pack hunters from the high plateaus. They rarely descend to these elevations except during drought years." She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the pattern of calls. There are at least 20. A full hunting pack. Outside their shelter, chaos erupted. Energy weapons discharged in rapid succession, accompanied by the screeching attack cries of the Venom strikers and the mechanical shouts of the scavengers. Through the narrow opening, they caught glimpses of sleek, reptilian forms launching themselves at the armored figures, predators undeterred by technology, driven by instinct and hunger. The scavengers are retreating, Jax observed, monitoring the energy signatures on his device. The strikers are forcing them back down the canyon. "They won't abandon the hunt entirely," Kyra cautioned. "But this gives us a window." She peered cautiously out of the fissure. "The strikers will focus on movement. If we remain still until full dark, we might slip past them to reach the ridge." They waited as daylight faded, and the sounds of combat gradually moved farther away. Occasionally, a pained mechanical voice would cry out, suggesting the Venom strikers were finding vulnerabilities in the scavenger's armor. Eventually, a tense silence fell over the canyon. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they cautiously emerged from their shelter. The game trail was littered with signs of battle: scorched rock, dark fluid that must be striker blood, and in one place, the severed arm of a scavenger's armor suit, still twitching with residual power. They ascended the trail as quietly as possible, hyper-aware of every sound in the darkness. Kyra led the way, her natural night vision superior to Jax's. Where the trail became particularly treacherous, she silently offered her hand to guide him across gaps or around loose sections of rock. They reached the ridge line as the first of Viridia Prime's 3 moons rose above the horizon, casting an amber glow across the landscape. From their elevated position, they could see for kilometers in every direction. The jungle canopy stretched like a dark sea to the south, while the northern horizon was dominated by jagged mountain peaks. "Those mountains," Jax said, pointing to the highest peaks, "that's where I need to get to establish a clear transmission." Kyra surveyed the terrain between their position and the mountains. "The journey will take at least 2 days on foot. The ridge system provides the most direct route, but it is exposed. The valleys offer more cover, but will add another day at minimum." Jax consulted his wrist device again. "The scavengers are regrouping at multiple points below us. They've called in reinforcements. I'm detecting a larger vessel approaching from the east." He looked up at Kyra, his expression grave. "They're escalating. This isn't just about eliminating witnesses anymore. They want us both silenced permanently." Kyra considered their options. "The ridge route is faster but more dangerous. We would be visible against the skyline for much of the journey. Time is critical," Jax argued. "If I can reach my team, they can bring in an extraction vessel with enough firepower to drive off the scavengers. But if those reinforcements arrive first, then we take the ridge," Kyra decided. "But we move now, while darkness still provides some cover. They set off along the narrow spine of rock that connected their current position to the next peak in the series, moving as quickly as safety allowed. The ridge path was treacherous, barely a meter wide in places, with sheer drops on either side. The moon's light illuminated their route, but also made them more visible to anyone watching from below. As they traversed the ridge, Kyra found herself increasingly troubled by Jax's revelations. If he spoke truth, then someone within the highest ranks of her people had betrayed not just their traditions, but their very survival. The thought was almost too painful to consider, yet she could no longer dismiss it outright. "These scavengers," she said as they paused to rest on a wider section of the ridge. "What exactly are they taking from our world?" Jax gazed out over the moonlit landscape. "From what I observed before they shot down my research vessel, they're primarily interested in your world's unique biochemical compounds. The bioluminescent fungi we saw in the cave, the defensive toxins in the spine leaves, the venom from those strikers, all valuable commodities in certain markets. But why would any Xylos aid them in this?" Kyra asked. "Our laws forbid such exploitation. Our way of life depends on the balance of nature. Power, wealth, the usual motivators," Jax replied. "Or perhaps they were deceived at first, told the extractions were minimal, sustainable. Once compromised, it will be difficult to back out." He glanced at her. "Do you have any idea who on your council might be involved?" Kyra's mind raced through the possibilities. The council consisted of 7 elders, each representing different aspects of Xylo's life. Hunting, agriculture, spirituality, defense, medicine, arts, and governance. All were respected, their positions earned through decades of service to the tribe. "Elder Vorix oversees defense and security," she said slowly. "He issues hunting orders, controls access to weapons, directs border patrols." She frowned. "He has also been most vocal about isolationism in recent cycles, arguing against any contact with off-worlders, even peaceful ones." "Classic misdirection," Jax observed. "Create a public persona vehemently opposed to the very activities you're secretly engaged in. Makes you above suspicion." They continued along the ridge path, each lost in their own thoughts. The multiple moons cast overlapping shadows, creating a disorienting terrain of light and dark. In the distance, something large and winged circled lazily against the night sky. "Sky Wraith," Kyra identified, pointing. "Nocturnal apex predator. Hunts by sound more than sight. We should minimize conversation." They proceeded in silence for nearly an hour, covering significant distance along the ridge system. Occasionally, Jax would check his wrist device, monitoring the movements of the scavengers below. They appeared to be spreading out, establishing a perimeter rather than pursuing directly a containment strategy. As they approached the junction where their ridge connected to a larger massif, Jax suddenly tensed. "Energy signature ahead," he whispered. "Single unit, stationary. Might be a sentry." Kyra assessed their options. Doubling back would cost precious time. Descending into the valleys would make them vulnerable. Forward was their only viable path. "I'll go first," she decided, stringing her bow and knocking one of her remaining arrows. "Stay low and follow only when I signal." Before Jax could protest, she had moved ahead, her form blending with the shadows of the rocks with practiced ease. She progressed meter by careful meter, using every available cover. The sentry came into view, a scavenger positioned on a flat outcropping that overlooked their approach. Its back was partially turned, attention seemingly focused on the valleys below. Kyra weighed her options. Her remaining arrows were too precious to waste on anything but a guaranteed kill shot, and the scavenger's armor made such certainty impossible at this range. A direct physical attack was risky, but potentially silent if executed perfectly. She crept closer, drawing her ceremonial dagger. The traditional blade was molecular-edged, capable of slicing through materials far tougher than flesh. If she could find a joint in the armor, 20 meters from the sentry, her foot dislodged a small stone that skittered across the rock face. The scavenger turned, its sensor array immediately focusing on her position. Kyra abandoned stealth for speed, launching herself forward in a sprint as the figure raised its weapon. The energy blast missed her by centimeters as she zigzagged toward her target. The scavenger attempted to back away while continuing to fire, but misjudged the edge of the outcropping. As it stumbled, Kyra closed the final distance and struck with her dagger, driving the blade into the narrow gap between helmet and shoulder armor. There was a sudden hiss of escaping atmosphere, and the scavenger convulsed. Rather than pulling the dagger free, Kyra leveraged it to force the armored figure backward, over the edge of the outcropping. It disappeared into the darkness, its fall silenced by the night wind. She turned to signal Jax forward, only to find him already moving to join her, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. "Efficient," he commented quietly as he reached her. "But they'll notice a missing sentry eventually." "Then we must make the most of the time bought," Kyra replied, retrieving her dagger from where it had fallen during the struggle. They pressed on at an increased pace, the terrain gradually ascending as they approached the mountain proper. The ridge widened into a plateau dotted with wind-sculpted rock formations and sparse, hardy vegetation. Here, they could move more quickly, though the open terrain made them more visible. Jax checked his device again, his expression darkening. "That larger vessel I detected? It's landed about 10 kilometers east of us, and there are multiple groups moving out from it in search patterns." "How many?" Kyra asked. "At least 20 new signatures, all armored and heavily equipped." He looked up at the mountain peaks ahead. "We're running out of time." The sky to the east was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn approaching. Soon they would lose the cover of darkness entirely. Kyra surveyed their surroundings, seeking inspiration. The plateau offered little concealment, but "The Whisper Caves," she said suddenly. "An underground network that runs through this entire massif, used by my ancestors during the great tribal wars for moving unseen across territories." "Sounds promising," Jax agreed. "But can we find an entrance from here?" Kyra oriented herself, identifying landmarks in the pre-dawn light. "There," she pointed to a cluster of standing stones about half a kilometer ahead. "That formation marks a shrine. All shrines connect to the cave system to allow private worship." They made their way to the standing stones, which were arranged in a rough circle around a central altar stone. Ancient symbols covered the weather-worn surfaces, a script Jax couldn't decipher, but that Kyra traced reverently with her fingertips. "We must show respect," she explained. "The caves are sacred space." She performed a brief ritual, touching specific symbols in sequence, then moved to the altar stone and pressed hidden leverage points. With a low grinding sound, a section of the ground beside the altar slid away, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. "After you," Jax said with a small smile. Kyra led the way down the narrow stairs, which curved deep into the mountain. The light from the entrance quickly faded, leaving them in near-total darkness until Jax activated a small light on his wrist device. The beam illuminated a vast chamber with numerous passages branching off in different directions. The walls were covered in the same ancient script they had seen on the standing stones above, interspersed with elaborate murals depicting scenes from Xylo's history. Unlike the natural caverns they had sheltered in earlier, these were clearly artificial, carved with precision by intelligent hands. "Which way?" Jax asked, his voice automatically lowering in the sacred space. Kyra studied the chamber, mentally mapping their location relative to their destination. "The northern passage," she decided. "It should lead toward the peak we need to reach." They entered the indicated tunnel, which wound steadily upward through the heart of the mountain. The air grew progressively cooler and thinner as they ascended. Occasionally, they passed side chambers containing artifacts of Xylo's history, weapons, ceremonial objects, tablets covered in the ancient script. "Your people have a rich culture," Jax observed as they passed through a particularly elaborate chamber displaying traditional hunting implements spanning clearly different technological eras. "These caves contain our entire history," Kyra replied. "When a new clan forms or a significant event occurs, it is recorded here, in the heart of the world, where all Xylos can access the knowledge regardless of tribal affiliation. And yet the Council restricted my research team's request to study your culture, Jax noted. Denied all access to historical sites. Another irregularity, Kyra acknowledged, her certainty about her world's leadership continuing to erode. Knowledge is meant to be shared among all who respect it. After nearly an hour of steady climbing through the tunnel system, they reached a chamber different from the others. This one was perfectly circular, with a shaft in the center that extended upward beyond the reach of their light. A spiral staircase of ancient stone wound around the shaft's perimeter. The ascension chamber, Kyra said with reverence. This leads to the highest sanctuary, near the peak. The climb was arduous, especially in the thin air, but eventually the staircase terminated at a small landing with a stone door. Kyra again touched specific symbols in sequence, and the door silently swung inward, revealing a small, dome-shaped sanctuary. At the center stood a stone pedestal, and above it, a circular opening in the ceiling admitted the golden light of sunrise. Perfect, Jack said, moving to the opening and examining the sky. We're near the peak, with clear line of sight to orbit. He removed the quantum entanglement communicator from his pack and placed it on the pedestal, which seemed designed for exactly such a purpose. This will take a few minutes to calibrate and transmit. While the device hummed to life, Kyra moved to the sanctuary's entrance, which opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking the vastness of Iridia Prime. From this elevation, the scale of the world became apparent. Endless jungle canopy to the south, rolling hills to the east, the glimmer of a distant ocean to the west. The beauty of it momentarily overwhelmed her, reinforcing all she was sworn to protect. A movement in the eastern sky caught her attention, a small craft rising from behind a distant ridge. Its design was sleek, predatory, unmistakably not of Iridia Prime. Jax, she called urgently. They've launched an aerial search. He joined her at the ledge, his expression grim as he spotted the craft. Scout ship. Standard procedure when ground teams fail to secure a target. He checked his communicator. Signal's still going out. My team will receive it, but their response time depends on their current position. The scout ship was moving in a methodical grid pattern, gradually working its way toward the mountain range. It was still distant, but its speed suggested they had perhaps 15 minutes before it reached their position. Can your team arrive before that ship finds us? Kyra asked. Jax shook his head slightly. Depends on where they are. Best case, 30 minutes. Worst case, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They retreated into the sanctuary, minds racing for solutions. The scout ship would have sensors far more sophisticated than the ground troops, making concealment nearly impossible. The sacred chamber offered spiritual significance but little tactical advantage. Your communicator, Kyra said suddenly, can it be programmed to transmit from a different location? To create a false signal? Jax considered this. Possibly. It would be a weaker signal, but might be enough to divert them temporarily. He returned to the device and began making adjustments. I can set it to emit a secondary pulse about 3 kilometers west of here. It won't fool them for long, but might buy us some time. While Jax worked on the communicator, Kyra inventoried their remaining resources. She had 2 arrows left, her dagger, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Jax had his energy weapon with limited charge, the communicator, and whatever technological skills he possessed. Against the scout ship, they seemed woefully inadequate. Done, Jax announced. Secondary pulse is active. Now we wait and hope they take the bait. They watched from the ledge as the scout ship indeed altered course, veering toward the western peak where the false signal originated. As it disappeared behind a mountain ridge, they breathed a collective sigh of relief, temporary though it might be. How long before your team can respond? Kyra asked. Jax checked the communicator status. Signal confirmed received. They're calculating jump coordinates now. He looked up with cautious optimism. 28 minutes until arrival, assuming no complications. And how long before that scout ship realizes the deception? 10 minutes, maybe less, Jax admitted. We need a fallback position. They surveyed their surroundings with new tactical awareness. The sanctuary was too exposed. The cave system below offered concealment, but would trap them if discovered. The mountainside itself provided few hiding places. Their options were severely limited. There, Kyra pointed to a narrow fissure in the rock face about 50 meters below their position. That might lead to one of the lesser shrines. Not as sacred as this chamber, but connected to the same network. They quickly gathered their belongings and exited the sanctuary, carefully picking their way down the treacherous mountainside toward the fissure. The going was slow. One misstep would mean a fatal fall, but eventually they reached the narrow opening. It was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through, opening onto a cramped tunnel that sloped downward. They followed it by the light of Jax's wrist device until it widened into a small grotto. Unlike the grand sanctuary above, this space was intimate, clearly designed for personal reflection rather than communal ceremony. "We should be safer here," Kyra said, though her tone lacked conviction. "The narrow entrance will force them to come one at a time, if they find us at all. And my team can still track the primary signal from the communicator," Jax added. He settled against a wall, finally allowing his exhaustion to show. Now we wait. The silence that fell between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts. After all they had endured together, the end of their journey, for better or worse, was approaching. Soon, they would either be rescued or captured. Either way, their forced alliance would conclude. "What will you do?" Jax asked quietly. "If we survive this, you can't return to your tribe. Not if the council is compromised." Kyra had been avoiding this very question. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I am is Xylos. My duty, my identity, my purpose." She touched the ceremonial markings on her face, symbols of her hunter status. But duty to what? To leaders who lie? To traditions exploited for gain? "You could come with me," Jack suggested, then seemed surprised by his own words. "My research team would welcome someone with your knowledge, and the galactic ecological authorities would need testimony to act against the scavengers." Before Kyra could respond, a distant rumble shook the mountain. Dust sifted down from the ceiling of their small sanctuary. "That wasn't natural," Jack said, already on his feet. They rushed to the entrance and carefully peered out. In the distance, a plume of smoke rose from the western peak, where their decoy signal had led the scout ship. "They're carpet bombing the area," Jack said grimly. "Standard scorched earth tactic when a high-value target is believed cornered. They would destroy an entire sacred mountain." Kyra was aghast. "They don't care about sacred anything," Jax replied, "only eliminating witnesses and covering evidence." As they watched, the scout ship emerged from behind the western peak and banked toward their location. Its sensors must have determined the deception and located the primary signal source. Back inside, Jax urged, "They'll start with targeted strikes before sending in ground forces." They retreated into the grotto just as the first energy blast struck the mountainside near the main sanctuary above. The entire mountain seemed to shudder with the impact. More blasts followed, systematically targeting the area around the primary signal. In the confined space of the grotto, each impact was magnified, the sound reverberating painfully. Small rock fragments rained down from the ceiling with each blast. The air filled with dust, making breathing difficult. "Your team," Kyra coughed. "How much longer?" Jax checked his device, squinting through the dust. 18 minutes. But at this rate, he didn't need to finish. The mountain wouldn't withstand 18 more minutes of bombardment. Already, cracks were spreading across the ceiling of their shelter. One particularly powerful blast sent a larger boulder crashing down in the corner of the grotto. "We need to move deeper," Kyra insisted. "Find another exit. If we leave this area, my team won't know where to find us," Jax countered. "The communicator has to stay here." Kyra considered their options as another blast shook their shelter. "Then we split up. You stay with the communicator. I'll find another way out and try to draw them off." "Absolutely not," Jax said firmly. "We survived this far by staying together. And we'll die together if we stay here," Kyra argued. "I know these cave systems. I can evade them, maybe even flank some of their ground forces when they come in for confirmation. Before Jax could argue further, a final massive blast shook the entire grotto. The ceiling groaned, large cracks spreading rapidly across its surface. A portion began to collapse. "Move!" Jax shouted, lunging forward to push Kyra toward the back of the chamber as tons of rock came crashing down. Dust filled the air, blinding and choking. When it began to settle, Kyra found herself in a portion of the grotto that had remained intact, separated from where Jax had been standing by a wall of fallen debris. "Jax," she called, coughing through the dust. "Jax, answer me." "I'm here," came his muffled reply from the other side of the rockfall. "Not hurt badly, but I'm cut off from the tunnel we came in through." "There's another passage back here," Kyra called, examining the rear of her section by the dim light filtering through cracks in the fallen rocks. "It might connect back to the main system." "The communicator is still functioning," Jax reported. "Team ETA now 14 minutes. But the bombardment has stopped. They'll be sending in ground troops to confirm kills." "Find a defensible position," Kyra instructed. "I'll try to circle around and rejoin you." She hurried into the new passage, which twisted downward into the mountain at a steep angle. Unlike the carefully carved tunnels of the sacred network, this appeared to be a natural formation, narrow, rough, unpredictable. She moved as quickly as caution allowed, counting heartbeats, knowing each one brought both rescue and enemy forces closer. The passage eventually intersected with what she recognized as part of the main cave system. Wider, smoother, marked with the ancient script. She oriented herself quickly. If she was right, this tunnel would lead her back up toward the sanctuary level, potentially behind where any invading forces would enter. She had covered perhaps half the distance when she heard them, the mechanical whir of scavenger armor echoing through the tunnels ahead. They had entered the sacred caves. The thought filled her with cold rage. These outsiders, violating the most revered spaces of her people, all for greed. Kyra knocked one of her final arrows and moved forward with absolute silence, becoming one with the shadows of the tunnel. She reached a junction where her passage met a larger corridor and pressed against the wall, listening. The sounds of multiple scavengers approached from the left, the direction of the main entrance. She drew her bow and waited. The first armored figure entered her field of vision, its sensor array sweeping the corridor methodically. Behind it came two more, weapons at ready. They were moving toward where Jax was trapped, unaware of the predator in their path. Kyra released her arrow. It struck the lead scavenger at the juncture of helmet and torso armor, finding the same vulnerability she had exploited earlier. The figure staggered, but didn't fall, reaching up to remove the projectile. She was already moving, emerging from cover with her dagger drawn. The wounded scavenger turned toward her, raising its weapon too late. Her blade found the weakened seal around its neck, piercing deeper this time. The figure collapsed. The remaining scavengers opened fire, energy blasts chipping stone from the walls as Kyra rolled behind a ceremonial column. She retrieved her final arrow, knowing it would need to count. Hostile engaged in Section 5. One of the scavengers reported mechanically. Native female, armed with primitive weapons. Primitive? Kyra murmured to herself. Let's test that theory. She darted from cover long enough to loose her final arrow, which struck one of the scavengers in the sensor array of its helmet. While it might not penetrate the armor, the impact disrupted the visual systems, leaving the figure temporarily blind. It fired wildly, one of its shots striking its companion. Kyra seized the opportunity, sprinting forward to engage the wounded scavenger before it could recover. Without arrows, she was at a disadvantage, but her dagger and superior agility might be enough. The scavenger fired again, the shot grazing Kyra's shoulder as she closed the distance. Pain lanced through her arm, but she didn't slow. She leapt, using the wall as a springboard to come at her opponent from an unexpected angle. Her dagger found a seam in the side of its armor, slipping between plates to reach the vulnerability beneath. The scavenger convulsed, its weapon discharging one final time into the ceiling before it fell. Kyra turned to face the one with the damaged helmet, which was now ripping the useless sensor array away, to reveal a transparent faceplate beneath. For the first time, she saw what lay inside the armor, a pallid, almost translucent face with eyes too large for its skull and breathing apparatus covering the lower portion. The creature regarded her with undisguised hatred. "You're interfering with a sanctioned extraction operation," it hissed through an external speaker. "This world is designated for resource utilization by Central Corporate Authority." "This world," Kyra replied, circling warily, "is home to the Xylos. And you are trespassers." The scavenger lunged with surprising speed, foregoing its ranged weapon for a wrist-mounted blade that extended with a menacing hum. Kyra dodged the first swipe, but the second caught her across her forearm, leaving a burning gash. She retreated, looking for an opening, aware that time was working both for and against her. Each moment brought Jax's team closer, but also increased the likelihood of more scavengers arriving. The corridor was lined with ceremonial artifacts, weapons, tools, symbols of Xylos heritage. Among them, Kyra spotted a ceremonial spear mounted on the wall. Not her preferred weapon, but it would provide the reach she needed against the scavenger's blade. She feinted left, then rolled right, coming up beside the mounted spear. With one smooth motion, she tore it from its mounting and turned to face her attacker. The weapon was ancient, but had been maintained with reverence. Its edge still sharp, its balance perfect. The scavenger charged again, blade slashing toward her midsection. Kyra deflected the attack with the shaft of the spear, then countered with a thrust toward the creature's exposed face. It jerked back, avoiding a killing blow, but losing its aggressive momentum. They circled each other in the sacred corridor, surrounded by the history of a world one sought to exploit and the other to protect. The scavenger was technically superior in armor and weaponry. Kyra had knowledge, skill, and the determination of one fighting for home. "Your resistance is futile," the scavenger said. "This operation has Xylo's approval at the highest levels." "The betrayal of one is not the consent of all," Kyra replied. "Viridia Prime is not yours to harvest." She attacked then, a flurry of strikes with the ceremonial spear that forced the scavenger on the defensive. One thrust managed to slip past its guard, the ancient blade scoring a hit on the armor's power distribution node. Sparks erupted, and the scavenger's movements became momentarily uncoordinated. Kyra pressed her advantage, driving the creature back with increasingly confident strikes. The spear was becoming an extension of her will, guided by generations of hunters whose spirits seemed to flow through the ancient weapon. A final powerful thrust penetrated the weakened armor at the power node. The scavenger froze, its systems failing, then collapsed to the floor in a heap of suddenly dead technology. Kyra stood, breathing heavily, the pain of her wounds now making itself known as the battle focus faded. She recovered her dagger from the fallen enemy and continued down the corridor, moving as quickly as her injuries permitted. She reached the collapsed grotto to find more signs of battle. Two scavenger bodies lay near the entrance, their armor showing the distinctive scorch marks of Jax's energy weapon. "Jax," she called into the partially collapsed chamber. "Here," came his strained reply. "They found me, but I managed to hold them off." He emerged from behind a fallen boulder, his face streaked with dust and blood from a cut above his eye. "Your timing is excellent. Any more on the way?" Kyra asked, helping him over the debris. He checked his wrist device. "Hard to tell. Signals are scattered. But my team is close, less than 5 minutes out." He noticed her injuries. "You're hurt." "Nothing serious," she dismissed. "We should move to the open. Your team will need to see us." They made their way back through the tunnels, encountering no further resistance. Either the initial force had been small, or the remaining scavengers were regrouping. Either way, it offered a brief respite they desperately needed. They emerged from the cave system near the base of the peak, in a small valley sheltered by overhanging rock. The scout ship was nowhere in sight, perhaps recalled when ground forces were deployed. Jax checked his communicator one final time. "They've entered atmosphere." 2 minutes. They waited in tense silence, scanning the sky for any sign of approach. Kyra found herself holding her breath, half expecting another attack before rescue could arrive. Her entire worldview had been shattered in the span of a day. The council she had trusted, the mission she had embraced, the enemy she had hunted, all had been transformed into something unrecognizable. A new sound reached them, the distinctive hum of advanced engines, different from the scavenger craft. A sleek vessel appeared over the ridge, its design elegant rather than predatory. It descended rapidly toward their position, hovering briefly before settling on the valley floor. A hatch opened, and armed figures emerged, uniformed rather than armored, their weapons held ready but not threatening. One stepped forward, clearly relieved at the sight of Jax. "Dr. Kane," the figure called. "It's good to see you alive." "Captain Vrel," Jax acknowledged. "Your timing is impeccable." More team members emerged from the ship, establishing a defensive perimeter while a medical officer approached to examine Jax's and Kyra's injuries. The efficiency of their operation spoke to professional training beyond mere research. "We detected multiple hostile signatures in the area," Captain Vrel reported. "Identified as Class 3 resource pirates, operating illegally in a protected biosphere. They have local assistance," Jax explained. "High-level collaboration from within the indigenous government." Vrel nodded grimly. "We've already transmitted preliminary findings to galactic ecological authorities. They're dispatching an intervention team." He glanced at Kyra. "This is the local who assisted you." "This is Kyra of the Xylos," Jax corrected. "Expert hunter, tracker, and the reason I'm still alive. She discovered her leadership was compromised and chose to help me instead of completing her mission to eliminate me." Vrel extended a respectful greeting to Kyra. "We're in your debt, and the GA will want your testimony about the collaboration." As the medical officer tended to their wounds, Kyra gazed back at the sacred mountain, now bearing scars from weapons never meant to touch this world. Everything she had known was changing, but perhaps not all for the worse. The corruption would be exposed, the exploitation would end, and her people would have a chance to reclaim their true relationship with their world. "What will you do now?" Jax asked quietly, echoing his earlier question. Kyra considered the research vessel, the team of scientists and security personnel, the broader universe that had suddenly opened before her. Then she looked back at the endless canopy of her homeworld, the sacred peaks, the lands that had shaped her people for countless generations. "I will stand between worlds," she said finally. "As you did. I will help my people understand what has happened, bear witness against those who betrayed us, and perhaps learn what lies beyond our skies." She met his gaze directly. "If your offer still stands." "A cultural liaison and xenoecological consultant?" Jack smiled. "I believe we have an opening." The sun climbed higher above Viridia Prime, illuminating a world forever changed by the events of a single day. A hunter had become a bridge. A target had become an ally. And somewhere in the spaces between stars, decisions were being made that would shape the future of a planet whose greatest resource was not its compounds or creatures, but its capacity for adaptation and renewal. As they boarded the research vessel, Kyra took one last look at her world from this new perspective, not from the heights of a sacred peak or the depths of an ancient forest, but from the threshold of departure. She was not abandoning her home, she realized, but expanding it. The universe beyond was not separate from Viridia Prime, but connected to it through webs of responsibility and stewardship that transcended any single species or world. She had climbed a tree to strike, only to discover she was already the hunted. Now she would soar among the stars, not as predator or prey, but as guardian of a heritage that deserved protection beyond the reach of any single council or corporation. The hatch closed behind them, and a future opened ahead.